Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all. I'm so happy we're all here, and I'm so excited that Julie Beckett, the legend, is here to talk with all of us and share her story and answer our questions. So, thank you to the Iowa team for making this happen, and thank you to Julie for being here. I'm going to now mute myself and turn on my listening ears.
Thank you. I'll begin by introducing you to one of Iowa's treasures, we call Julie. And actually, we really should say she's a national treasure too, because we know her work has affected us all. So, Julie Beckett is the mother of Katie Beckett, who was the first medical home and community based waiver child. The waiver was granted in 1981 and has become the vehicle for many people with disabilities to receive care at home or in their communities. Before Katie's death in 2012, she and her mother testified numerous times before Congress and worked on many projects in an advisory capacity for the Maternal and Child Health Bureau, part of the Health Resources and Services Administration. She was also the first parent representative in Iowa's Title V program for children with special health care needs, and this is the position that paved the way for other parent employees, which we now call Family Navigators in Iowa, in Title V. Julie also helped found Family Voices, an organization dedicated to serving children and youth with special health care needs, and served as its policy coordinator for 10 years. Ms. Beckett has written several publications, including Healthcare Financing, a Guide for Families. So welcome, Julie, where we'll listen to your story about Katie's story at the beginning here, and then we have questions for you to frame some discussion about how families can become leaders in the system of care.
Well, thank you, Diane. I appreciate that. Those are very kind words. And actually, I know you said I was the first one in Iowa to be hired, but actually I was the first one in the country to be hired by a Title V program, which was kind of one of those things, but it just happened, and then all of a sudden it became a thing that everybody needed to have on board. So then more and more of my friends got hired. So that was very good. But I always like to begin with Katie, only because she was such a wonderful person. Katie was born March 9th, 1978, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She unfortunately was 3 months premature. Wasn't her fault, it was mine. She she did very well, but I got sick. My blood pressure went sky high. I got preeclampsia, in other words, my kidneys failed. And so while I went into the hospital on a Monday afternoon, after my doctor's appointment, I was there until Thursday morning when they started me to deliver Katie. And I knew she was too early to come and all of that. But my good Irish Catholic father, they're wheeling me down to the operating room, leans over and he says, "Julie, I've checked with the priest and everything's okay. You can do this." And I was like, okay. So it was like, there were no decisions I had to make. Thank you very much. But it is kind of one of those things where you don't realize how involved of this became. So I was in the hospital from Monday through Thursday. Actually, I delivered on Thursday morning, and the priest came and baptized her that afternoon. And then they discharged me on Saturday because I had no health insurance, which was a very trying time for me and very concerning. Katie did very well at home. Even though she was premature, she did very well in the hospital, actually coming home before her due date. And she came home, her dad was adopted, and they always celebrated Chosen Day because that was the day his parents chose him. And that was the day Katie came home from the hospital, which was kind of one of those things where, oh, gee, everything just happened at once. But the last couple of weeks, she'd get to 5 pounds and then she'd drop a couple of ounces and they'd say, no, she can't go home yet. So it was kind of one of those really hard things. So Katie did very well at home. We had a wonderful summer together. I actually got a teaching job, which I was a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher for years. And I got that job, and she ended up doing very well. But I went off to school, left her at home with a friend of mine, and she did very well. The weekend before I started school, we had gone down to Iowa City. A friend of Mark's had come in from New Jersey, and they were having a little picnic outside. And just in my own mind, that's where I think she picked up the encephalitis. She got viral encephalitis at 5.5 months of age, and seemed to be, she was in the hospital and they were watching her, but then she aspirated and went into severe respiratory distress. She was placed in the ICU. By the time I got there, her bed was empty and all of that. And I ran to the nurse's station and said, "Where's Katie?" And they said, "Oh, she's back in the ICU." So I went right back, and she was in terrible shape, really, really terrible shape, just having a very hard time breathing. So she, with the aspiration, she went into respiratory distress. She fought that for about 5 hours, while Mark and I both sat there waiting for her to do whatever she was going to do. She had another grand mal seizure, went into a coma, and at that point was placed on life support and raced up to the neonatal intensive care unit. She'd been in the pediatric intensive care unit when she first aspirated, but then with this encephalitis or whatever it was, they weren't sure what exactly it was. When she slipped into the coma, they waited 24 hours, and then they did tests on her brain to make sure there was brain activity. And in fact, thank heavens, Mark had gone off to school that day because he was getting his degree in biomedical engineering, of all things. And I was at the hospital, and when they finished the test, they came in and they said, "There's activity in all parts of her brain. We just don't know when she's going to wake up." And it happened 3.5 weeks later. Her eyes opened, her facial features moved, everything was fine, seemed fine, but she was paralyzed really from the neck on down. And it took months for stuff to come back. They had to place a tracheostomy tube to attach her to the ventilator because she'd been just intubated, and of course those aren't very stable, so they wanted to make sure she was going to be okay. So they did the tracheostomy tube when she was 6 months old, and then they kept her on the ventilator. And by the time 9 months rolled around, she was still not handling any of her secretions. So they ended up having to put a gastrostomy tube in. That was before they did buttons, guys. This is old history here. So anyway, she had a gastrostomy tube, and that's how we fed her for a long time. Gastrostomy tube was placed at 9 months of age, and then then they moved her back down to the pediatric intensive care unit, which really scared me to death, because we'd lost her once there. Let's not lose her again. But actually, she did very well in the PICU, and the nurses had come up to the NICU to learn how to take care of her, because she was really on a small vent. She wasn't on this major vent, which could have caused major lung damage. But thank heavens we had the pediatrician who had started the neonatal intensive care unit at our hospital and had just started the pediatric intensive care unit. So that's why he knew where things were going to be happening. So that worked out very well for her. She did pretty well, the problem is that, when you're in a hospital setting and you're not really sick, you're susceptible to everything. And I think now with COVID-19, we've all learned that, you got to mask up, you have to do it. I did that for 3 years, before people were complaining about masking up. I said, there's nothing wrong with the mask. Trust me, I lived my life that way for 3 years. Anyway, she did actually quite well. And it was actually after her second birthday, she walked for the first time. One of the other one of her roommates at the PICU wanted to go to the playroom, and all the nurses were busy. So Katie just grabbed his hand and said, "Come on, I'll take you," which is what she did, which is typical of Katie Beckett. She was just like that all the time. And this little guy was just like, okay. So yeah, they watched her walk down the middle of the hallway with this kid's hand, and she'd never walked anywhere around before. And it was just, so it was kind of one of those amazing things. She did very, very well. Her hospital stays did have several pneumonias. Actually, one of her pediatricians got out a plug that was the size of a baseball at one point. She was having trouble breathing and all of that. She pulled this, had to take the trach out, had to pull it out of her hole, which was fine. She got it out, and the doctor still remembers Katie looked up at her and said, "Thank you."
Aww.
Which, was just, that's been her dream ever since. That pediatrician is so wonderful. And actually, her husband passed away several years ago, and they decided that she'd been asked by AAP, who was starting a new facility, and she said, "I'll only do it if you name it after Katie Beckett." And so there's now a place at the new facility at AAP, and that's Katie Beckett's room, basically. And it really is to help families, a place where families can go, where pediatricians can talk to families, where they can involve them in different activities. So I'm very proud of that as well. And it was a wonderful experience. I was not so much the advocate, although, I'd had to be an advocate for Katie, just acknowledging that not everybody knew everything. And actually, our pediatrician said, "We're basically writing the book with Katie. We have no idea where we're going next, but all we can do is try different things." And so that's what they did. And somehow it all came together, and she did very, very well. We did at her, just after her second birthday, and she started to walk, or she was walking around, they said it was okay for us to think about putting her in maybe a daycare program. So we took her to Montessori. Her dad would pick her up at noon, stay with her for an hour while she was at Montessori. It was really very helpful, but all the kids were, healthy kids and doing really well. And Katie did contract a terrible viral infection in her lungs, and that was the end of Montessori. We weren't doing that again. So it turned out that she actually did quite well. And it wasn't until the medical social services department came and talked to us, because the pediatricians had said, Katie's pediatrician had said to them, "We're thinking about letting Katie go home." And one of them came running up saying, "You don't understand. Katie has no health insurance left. We had used up in a little over 2 years our whole health insurance." And I had applied for Social Security, supplemental security income at the time, and Katie was eligible for that. She had a wonderful advocate at Social Security who actually was in a wheelchair, kind of knew all about Katie Beckett, which was really kind of a nice thing. And so they really worked with us to talk about how we could get Katie home, even though Medicaid didn't pay for home care. And we were on the phone with the medical social services person. Diane Ratner was her name. And we got a hold of our state Medicaid director, and he was on the phone, and we talked to him about how important it was to get Katie home if we possibly could. And she had known about what they call an exception to policy, which is actually how Katie got home. And he said, "Well, no one in the state of Iowa has ever gotten one." And Diane just stood right up and said, "Well, then we think Katie ought to be the first," kind of thing. And, talk about empowerment. You don't even realize you have that kind of hump behind you until somebody actually says it. So that really was, we had to fill out paperwork. We met with Congressman Talkey, who was the 2nd District Congressman at the time. He had actually been at Loris when I was at Clark. which is kind of one of those amazing things. And I'd gone to school with both of his sisters who went to Clark, which was really kind of fun. And none of them were married, none of them, you know. So it was kind of interesting aha moment for us when he came to visit Katie. And he was just amazed at how well Katie looked and how well she did. And, you know, he flew back to Washington, D.C. with our paperwork and hand delivered it through the Department of Health and Human Services with his staff people all the way following him along. And this is where things got very interesting. So that took the summer of 1981. And Katie was, over the summer, we wrote this paperwork up, did all that kind of stuff. We did a lot of gathering of statistics. And we found out that home care would cost us about a third of what it was currently costing Medicaid in the hospital. And that was the winning thing. That's how we got this whole thing passed. But still, even though Congressman Taki walked it through, he got a letter saying that they didn't pay for, Medicaid didn't pay for home care, and they were sorry. They couldn't do anything about it. And Congressman Taki was getting on the plane with Vice President Bush the next day, and he hand-delivered this letter that basically said, her parents want her home, the doctors think she'll do well at home, and we believe, and it'll cost 1/6 the current cost we're paying for Medicaid. Well, that convinced Vice President Bush, who also knew about children. As you all may be aware or may not, you may not be aware, Vice President Bush lost a daughter at 3 years of age to leukemia. And so he was kind of sensitive to this whole issue to begin with. It's nice to be able to meet with a dad, you know. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he was great and really very helpful, and went to the Oval Office the next morning after coming back to Washington, D.C. with Congressman Taki after speaking at Iowa State University. And he said to the president, Mr. President, we need to find this little girl and fix the problem. And they talked for a little while, and then the president turned, picked up the phone, hit the button that said HCFA, which is the Healthcare Finance Administration, which is what CMS is right now, was before. And this woman who answered the phone had been a teacher as well, but she taught nursing at the University of Michigan and had just been appointed Medicaid director at HCFA, or director of HCFA. So she knew, and she said to the president, because of course she didn't realize that she wasn't supposed to answer back to the president. She said, you understand, Mr. President, if we fix this for this little girl, we have to fix it for everybody else. And his response was, well, you know, Carolyn, it's your job. And she said, thank you very much. That's all I needed to hear. So she gathered a group in the secretary's dining room, and they met for 72 hours. The assistant to the Medicaid director was a little ticked off about this because he'd only been married 2 weeks. His wife didn't understand why he had to stay away for 72 hours. He became a very good friend of ours, and of course she understood as soon as everything started happening with Katie. But it's just kind of one of those things where you never, it's the right people at the right place at the right time. And she just happened to have a history because she used to send her little nurses over to take care of these kids who lived in hospitals, you know. And nobody had any idea how much this was all costing the government because nobody ever looked at it. And we just have to be the one that gathered the statistics that helped them understand how important it was. Anyway, December 19th, 1981, Katie was granted her exception to policy, and they had a huge party in the cafeteria. Congressman Taki brought a beautiful stuffed bear, you know, with a little talkie kind of thing on it, which was great. And the president and Mrs. Reagan sent Katie a doll, which I still have. And of course we call her Nancy. So it was very kind of one of those things. Anyway, so it was a big deal to get her home. News media, the entire cafeteria was packed with news media people, and of course then the President and Mrs. Reagan called, and all that got recorded, and all of her nurses were there and crying, so happy that Katie was going to get to go home. And it was just a wonderful experience in our life. So we were able to bring Katie home, but it was kind of funny, and you can imagine this, that we had several respiratory therapists just stop by to see us after we got Katie home, and mainly to make sure we were doing everything right, I'm sure. But they were so happy just to be there, and to us that was very exciting, and it was very nice. So basically, that's how Katie got home. She had been tested by the Area Education Agency, which does a lot of our testing, and they tested Katie in the hospital, and they concluded that Katie wasn't ever going to fit in a regular classroom, that she was uneducable, this kind of thing. I thought Mark was going to throw them out of our condo at one point when she's telling us this. But actually, they did consent to sending out what they called a homebound teacher. Now we call them early childhood education people who come into homes and help families work with their kids. Anyway, so early intervention is what it really was. And that's nice that the wording changed so much, because homebound made it sound like you had to stay at home no matter what. And that was not the case in Katie's case. Actually, she came home December of 1981 and walked into a regular preschool classroom September of 1982. And, I gotten this all worked out. The principal was second in charge. Her teacher was taught how to suction. We had all sorts of things. Even though she had 20 other kids in the classroom, she would gather them all around and say, now we have to be very good, because Katie needs me to do this to make sure she's okay. That really helped a lot. So I feel she did so well, and she grew in that short period of time to become her own person. We testified before Congress when she was 7 years old, and at one point, one of the gentlemen running the committee hearing said Katie's name, but didn't call on her, because I was going to do the speaking. And Katie was sitting with her dad, and she went up to him afterwards. She goes, "Excuse me, you said my name, but you didn't tell me to talk." He says, "Well, you can put anything into the record you want," kind of thing. But she just had enough of a sense of herself that she could see where things were going. So with that, I'll have Diane ask the questions, if that's okay. And if you have any other things you'd like to ask, I'm here. So.
Thank you so much, Julie. So you noticed right away you were doing this work across Iowa, figuring out how many people were, how expensive it was to have children in the hospital. How did it occur to you to broaden your advocacy to other institutionalized children? And how is that important?
Well, I think I need to clarify a little bit. I said I was a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher. Mm-hmm. And of course, in 8th grade, you learn civics. So it was all about government, all about the things you were supposed to do. So I'm standing up there telling my 8th graders, if you got a problem, go see your congressman. Then I had to do it myself, which was really an amazing thing. And talk about knees shaking at the time. It was really important. But, you don't realize how important that is. Actually, I had been talking to Congressman Talkey and about what other information we needed to gather for people. And so it was kind of an amazing opportunity for us to have different conversations with different people. It was at that point, actually, and you're going to ask about him later, that Dr. John McQueen, who ran the Title V program that was administered out of the University of Iowa, was looking all over for me. And it turns out the head of Maternal and Child Health Bureau was Dr. Vince Hutchins at the time. Vince was one of John McQueen's students, and he was born in Dubuque, Iowa. Anyway, he asked John if he found me yet, and he said, no, I've looked all over Des Moines. He goes, she's not in Des Moines, she's in Cedar Rapids. So it was really kind of one of those aha moments for John. And that helped because Iowa City's only 30 miles away. So that really helped cement, and he really led me down the path, Dr. McQueen. So just
what do you attribute Dr. McQueen's openness? What do you attribute that to, engaging you as a partner, as a family member?
Well, I think one of the things that's so important was that at the time, Surgeon General Koop was part of the Public Health Service, and of course, Maternal and Child Health as part of the Public Health Service. But he was a very strong family advocate. He thought mothers and fathers knew more about their kids than anybody else. And he would teach that to his pediatricians when he taught at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia before becoming Surgeon General. So I think that was part, so there was already a background in how families can really help teach people about their own kids and the difference that they can make in changing people's minds. I think in many ways, people don't realize that these families do incredible work at home. And I think that's what John knew was happening, and he just wanted to formalize that. So he had checked into the waiver programs that had been passed in the state of Iowa, and we had 5 waiver programs we had applied for, but had not received one of them until after a whole redo of everything. And it was kind of one of those interesting phenomenons, because he really realized that it was in coordinating the care that really needed to be done for these children and their families. And it had to be in the context of the family. So I did go down after teaching school all day. I'd take Katie down. We'd go down to John's office. We'd meet for a couple hours. We'd go home. And this happened probably 2 to 3 times a week for almost 6 months. And it was designing a program that we ended up calling the Home Care Monitoring Program. And what John McQueen was what people don't realize, John McQueen was so bright and so intelligent that he understood that these kids needed to live in a community environment. So they needed to have really a community pediatrician. They needed to have the nurse at the clinic work with them. They needed to have OT and PT from their community be a part of that. He had that in place already. Yeah. So he was already doing those kinds of things before Katie came along, and then writing this program really helped a lot. And he said, oh, we need a nurse now to fill out the questions that they need to follow, kind of thing. And I said, I just happen to have a friend who just retired from St. Luke's Hospital. Let me call her and see if she's willing to work with us. And Brenda Moore, I did call her. She went down and talked to John McQueen. He hired her right away. And then he came to me and he said, you understand, Julie, that we can't do this without a parent. So we'd like to hire you as well. But people don't understand, I was out of health insurance. I mean, we basically were bum poor, and Medicaid was paying for Katie's home care piece, that we got that settled at least. But if I worked at the University of Iowa, they were a large group employer. So they had to give me health insurance. They had to give Katie health insurance, which was amazing. And I got 4 other parents hired under John's program within the next couple of years, a couple of dads, you always need a couple of dads around. And so it was really, we learned from each other, and we learned how to develop these programs. And actually the Family Navigator program is kind of an offshoot of all of that, right, that had been done. Daryl Bolander, God rest his soul, he's gone now, he had a heart attack. And Denny Hoyt were two of the guys we found. And then in each one of the clinic systems, we identified a parent. There were 14 regional clinics at the time I started there, And I think they're down to 12 now or so. But it's so important to have that there. So that's where we are.
That's exactly right. So you left Title V then to work with the National Maternal and Child Health Resource Center, and then you joined some other family leaders to found Family Voices. Can you talk about what the role of Family Voices is in the system of care now?
Well, this is an interesting. Can I give you a little background on the National Maternal and Child Health Resource Center? It was actually at the law school, and they were kind of pushing Dr. McQueen out of the healthcare piece. And so they founded this National Maternal and Child Health Resource Center that then helped John kind of go as an emeritus professor there, and he asked me to come with him. So of course I said yes. But along with all of this, Medicaid was really critical in this whole piece, which a lot of people don't understand. I had good friends at Medicaid in Washington, D.C. And whenever a state would call up about these waiver programs or about anything they could do to help kids get out of the hospital, my friend Mary would say, well, call Julie Beckett, have her come down and talk to you about it, because it's really very simple and easy enough to do. So I was traveling all over the country, and John let me do it. The woman who is running the National Maternal and Child Health Resource Center let me do that. But it was kind of one of those things, it was almost like going out and helping Medicaid do the job they were designed to do. And so that helped in many ways. So the National Maternal and Child Health Resource Center had several grants, one under case management, which was a huge key to kids getting home from the hospital. Everybody and their brother was trying to kind of design something as we had done in Iowa, but it was really quite simple. They could take this scope of things that we learned and design it based on that. So we went around the country and did some of that kind of stuff too. So that's really how I got to be more vocal about things, and Medicaid appreciated that. And they were very helpful in so many ways, because they founded a whole unit on home and community-based services, which now is the lingo for the waiver programs, which is good. Right. It's all good.
And then you helped to found Family Voices. Yeah. So what's the role of Family Voices in the system of care now, and how can the states on our call today connect?
Well, I think one of the things that was difficult for us, healthcare wasn't mandated by anybody at the time, but education was. And we had parents working in parent training information centers across the country, and they had 4 regional offices that kind of monitored what the states were doing, that kind of thing, in education. Section 504 of the Rehab Act helped us get into some of the occupational speech therapy kinds of things that schools eventually took on, but it had to be molded into this same kind of system. We realized that we weren't going to get health care. We loved the fact that somebody wanted to do something about healthcare, but the problem was that nobody really knew what to do or how to do it. And then the Clintons were elected, and Mrs. Clinton took off on the healthcare piece. And of course, all of our families we'd been working with kind of panicked, because they were like, wait a second, we know how to do this kind of stuff. These guys don't know how to do it. And Mrs. Clinton's unfortunate healthcare reform bill did not pass. It was really downsided by a lot of people, which was really too bad, because all the elements that went into the Affordable Care Act were in her original piece. So it's kind of one of those things that you just don't realize what's going to happen until it happens. And so we were a little panicked, because we needed to organize families of kids with special healthcare needs. We had pushed some legislation through the Maternal and Child Health Bureau, talking about how important it was to use that kind of language, because even though kids with disabilities counted under the PTIs, they didn't necessarily count kids with special healthcare needs, like kids who had asthma, kids who had kidney disease, kids who had heart conditions, those kinds of things, which is what Title V was monitoring. And so it really helped us understand if we were going to do this, So I actually was working with the Division for Early Childhood with the Council for Exceptional Children. I was part of their board of directors, and I recommended that we have parent meetings at the council's meetings, and so we did. And at one point we said, let's bring in our friends and we'll all meet, and we met one afternoon, Washington Hilton, in the basement kind of area. But we had about 30 families who had come in, lots of people from the Washington, D.C. area, but a number of families we have flown in for this family day. And we sat around, and within 6 hours, we had the name, we had our goals, what we wanted to achieve, how we were going to do it. And of course, it was Polly Arango, who has been deceased for a while now, and Josie Wall from Hawaii. So Polly from New Mexico, Josie from Hawaii, and I all joined together, and we decided that we needed to be the Family Voices Network. And one of the guys from Iowa, Bill Stumpf, I don't know if you know him, but Bill Stumpf had originally come up with the voices of families, which, sounded great, except Polly turned around and said, well, why not Family Voices? Okay, there we were. We were set and ready to go. And then she turned to me and she goes, Julie, since you've been all over the country doing this kind of thing, why don't you identify a parent in every state that we might call on? So that was my job, So I was able to identify a family person in every state that was willing to take on just their role as a Family Voices person for that state. That has matured into a much larger group now, and actually there's a number of them that have done such incredible work. So that's really where this all came from, Family Voices. It really just started and we started getting asked to be on, to do presentations and to do all of that. And that really got the message out to people. And the thing was, Katie's story was so perfect for it because she did so well when she got home. And but so was Nick Arango, who is Polly's son, who had multiple disabilities. Actually, initially, he was quite well off, and then he reached puberty and he started to deteriorate really significantly. And it's clearly a genetic disorder. So it was kind of good to be able to pull all sorts of people in. Josie Wall's daughter, Cassidy, whose birthday is today. Oh. And I think she's 45 years old today. Anyway, she had been born without the bottom part of her brain. And so they had a lot of different things that had to be done for her. And they went ahead and did them. Mm-hmm. They kept telling Josie she would never walk. Well, 3 body casts later, and she walks. Not well, but she walks. And she works at the mall. Everybody knows her. She worked at the movie theater. We couldn't go anywhere in Honolulu that somebody didn't come up and say, okay, what's good on the matinee scene today, kind of thing. It just was a natural kind of way of pulling people together. And Family Voices started, but Betsy Anderson also had gotten a grant, the Collaboration Among Parents and Professionals, the CAP project. And we went to New England every fall, and there were a lot of Family Voices people there. I mean, it really was just this coming together and this support, and maternal and child health were just wonderful in helping us do that. So,
Julie, when you look at the families who've partnered with professionals, what do families need in order to partner well? Do they need a particular resume or skill set? What do families need to partner well with professionals?
I think it's important that both parties listen. I think parents have to listen to professionals, professionals have to listen to parents. And I think it's a combination of that that helps bring them, if they keep their eye on the ball, which the child with special health care needs, that's the most important thing to do, is make sure that you have that, that combined voice that respects each other and shows how things can happen and come together for everybody, not just, not just your particular child, but your child and other children like them. So this whole return to learn thing has been a very difficult episode for me, only because, they're trying our kids out, and then they close, they start back to school, then they close a couple of days later and they start back to school. It's really hard on the kids, but I think it's as hard on the families. Yeah. And professionals need to know that we're partners with them. We're not going to blame them for making any wrong moves, because nobody knows what's going on in the world, Yeah. And the mask coverings are really critical.
The 5 states that received this HRSA grant are charged with developing family navigators in their states. What advice would you give them as they develop their work in their state?
I think the most important thing is to reach out. They may not recognize that they have leaders already in the parent community, and I think you need to reinforce that to a lot of people. And instead of just 5 professionals talking to somebody on a panel, one of them should be a parent and speak from the heart. And I think that it really has become so critical, a base for so much of what we've been able to do. We had a number of families who were hired right away by the Title V programs, and I think that's really, really important for us to be thinking about. So I'd say just a joint effort. So, and to be listening all the time.
Well, can everybody join me in giving Julie a round of applause for her sharing with us today? We are, as Marcia indicated, at the 3:15 time light, but Julie is willing to stay on. If any of you would like to unmute and talk with Julie, in particular, we have about 15 minutes to do that. So would anybody have questions or comments or?
I have to tell you, I got a call from the Family Voices office, actually an email saying somebody had contacted the Family Voices office to get a hold of me. And of course, I don't work for Family Voices anymore, but I sit on their board of directors. So they knew how to get a hold of me and all of this. This pediatrician from Omaha, Nebraska, had given her name and her phone number. So I called her on the phone and I said, "Carla, this is Julie Beckett." She goes, "No, you're not." I said, "Yes, I am. Actually, I am Julie Beckett." And she said, "Well, I need to give this talk to pediatricians. What are your 5 go-to things to say?" And I said, just start with keep it simple when you're advocating. Keep it as simple as you can be. The second one is don't overwhelm them with every surgical procedure you've had done and all of that. Keep it light, simple, how well their kids are doing. I said, make sure that you give them a picture of their kids so that they can put that in their desk when, and they say, we need to get a hold of this woman because she knows what she's talking about, that kind of thing. Those are the important things, and I think we've learned over the years are the most critical piece. And answer as best you can. But if somebody says, all need to go. Well, I guess actually.
Hold on, on mute.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, I'm so sorry.
Okay,
Did I have a teenager speaking to me? So
but
my apologies.
The one thing that I think is really important is that you have to make friends with people. It's not their fault that they don't understand. It really is, they just really need to hear it from somebody. So I hope that's helpful.
One of the things I remember that you've said over the years when you tell your stories, Julie, is never burn any bridges that you might need to cross someday.
That's right.
That's
Absolutely.
just been very helpful to me.
And be as honest as you can be. I know what I was going to say. One last thing is if you don't know the answer to something, don't try to fudge it. Just say, I don't know that right now, but I will get back to you with that, and then make sure you get back to them. And that's really important. The other thing that I would say is always send a thank you note. Thank you so much for taking 5 minutes to meet with me. Thank you so much for hearing about my daughter, my son, or whatever. I think those are the most critical pieces. It's building that friendship, and keep going back to them, and the most important thing, and I did tell this to this pediatrician the other day, I said, they need to see them at home. It's not important for you to see them in Washington, D.C. It's more important for you to have them in your own home, to have them in your own community, maybe go see a daycare. They love getting pictures taken with our kids. That's all there is to it. So those kinds of things, just keep that in mind. I think you'll do well.
Anybody else on the call here who would like to speak with Julie and ask her questions or share anything?
And you can always email me. It's really easy. It's waivermom, WAIV as in velvet, ERMOM @earthlink.net. I've never changed that. I actually had a gentleman from the Institute for Child Health in Florida introduced me as Julianne Beckett Waiver. And he goes, her last name is not Waiver. It really is. Just, it ends at Beckett. So there you go. Okay, guys. Thank you for everything.
Nina, did you?
Yes. Well,